Good. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. So today, obviously, about half of the topics deal with commercial mortgage-backed securities, and the other half are just other sort of random things I've thrown in to hopefully enlighten you a bit more. All right. So CMBS. We talked about this a little bit. You know, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, we talked a little bit about the whole tranching and obviously creating these different pools for different sorts of investors and that sort of thing. But let's just talk a little bit more kind of about why this whole industry even exists of commercial mortgage-backed securities and kind of how it all, for the most part, kind of got started and what the real sort of fundamental thrust behind it is. So, historically, lenders pretty much, and I think we talked a little bit about this, you know, they have a certain amount of money that they have available to them at their local institution to lend out, okay? Whatever dollar amount that may be. You know, it may be 10 million, it may be 100 million, maybe 500 million, you know, $1 billion, whatever it is. And then once they lend out that money to whoever, if they keep all of those loans internally and they don't sell the loans off to anyone else, then the money that they make on those loans is coming from the different sources that we've talked about. It's coming from the loan origination fees, it's coming from the loan administration or servicing fees, it's coming from the prepayment penalties, and it's coming from just the overall interest, you know, that obviously on the loan, all right? And so those are their sources of income. Now, if they choose to sell off the loans to someone else, typically large-scale institutional players, okay, a lot of times pension funds and that sort of thing, then they can get those loans off of their books, and that frees them up to basically then make more loans, okay, and then make more money off of, especially off of the upfront charges. Now, here's the thing. Once they sell off the loans, they're no longer going to get what of those items of income. They're no longer going to get the interest payments. They're no longer going to get the prepayment penalties. They're no longer going to get the servicing fees. But what they do get is the upfront, you know, sort of loan origination fees. That's why that's so mission critical to those lenders, is because that's a big chunk of how they make their money is off those loan origination fees. But whenever they have made all of these loans, and let's give me a dollar amount of their whole portfolio.
$2 billion.
2 billion?
There you go.
All right, sure, why not? Okay, 2 billion. All right. So once they've made $2 billion worth of loans, then, as I said, they're going to package those loans up together as if it was basically a bulk sort of arrangement, okay? And so all of those loans, it might be 10 loans, it might be 10,000 loans, okay? But they're all, in essence, put together in this one big package that they would then sell off, okay? Now, typically, you know, what would happen is you're going to go through and you're going to kind of look at each loan individually, but for simplicity's sake, you sort of say, okay, well, what is the overall average sort of interest rate that this portfolio is sort of throwing off? Okay, so give me an interest rate.
6%.
Okay, 6%. All right, 6% interest rate off of that portfolio. Now, what that would mean, if we sort of, such a big number, 2 million, 2 billion. All right, lots of zeros. Hopefully the calculator goes out that far. So let's just say, all right, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Okay, it's as big as we can get. All right, so we multiply that by 6%. So that would mean, it's hard to fathom this, but $120 million of interest off of that portfolio of $2 billion. Okay, does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay, now we're keeping things simple here. We're not getting into, you know, all of the different little sort of charges associated with this. We're sort of saying simple interest 6%, this is generating $120 million in interest each year. Okay, now, typically what they do is they put these loans together, and for simplicity's sake, we're gonna keep the term to, let's say, 10 years. All right? So with this, if we want to sort of think about it, all right, so the lender, if they make this $2 billion worth of loans at 6% and basically 10-year sort of maturities on these, what sort of, with nothing else being thrown up here, what sort of a rate of return are they going to get on those loans? It's not like a hard question.
Yeah, right.
6%.
6%.
Okay. Now that's, once again, no fees, no charges, nothing else, they're going to get 6% as their rate of return. Now, obviously, there are fees and charges that they can then begin to sort of, add into this, in terms of making these loans, like loan origination fees. Now, what I've done is I've provided you with a handout. This is from the book, okay? For those of you that have the book or don't have the book, but it doesn't really matter, this is from the book. All right, blew it up a little bit so that it's a little bit more visible. And what they refer to it as origination profit. It's kind of the second line item under these two different scenarios. So origination profit is loan origination fees, okay? That's all it is, all right? So in this case, they're saying 0.2%, okay, on this overall portfolio, all right? So if that's the case, we use that number.
Is that the profit from originating the loans or
Yes.
originating the CMBS?
No, this is from just originating the loan.
Okay.
We're going to get to the CMBS part here in a second. Okay, so that basically 0.2% would then mean 0.002. Okay, everybody with me on that? So from that, that would be $4 million that they get up front as basically origination, as they are calling it, origination profit or loan origination fees. Okay? Is everybody with me so far? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you're sort of thinking about this just in terms of cash flows for a second, all right, so here, basically, over this 10-year period, all right, at time period 0, from the lender's perspective, they are fronting $2 billion. Okay, but then they are simultaneously receiving what? No, not interest. The $4 million origination fees, okay? All right. Then in year 1, how much are they receiving?
They're receiving
124?
120 million in interest. And they're receiving that all the way pretty much to the very end. So in year 10, they're receiving the 120 million, all right? And they are also receiving what? The reversion. Basically, in other words, they're being, the loan is being paid off at the end of the 10-year period, or the prepayment is occurring,
Balloon payment.
the loan payment, the balloon payment, if you will, of the 2 million or 2 billion. God, working with billions is uncomfortable. All right, 2 billion is received at year 10. Okay, so there's the setup. All right, now what I want you to do is to calculate, well, what is the lender's yield or lender's internal rate of return off of that, okay? So what you're going to do, in this case, it is going to be one payment per year because that's all that you're being given, all right? So one payment per year. Okay, so at time period 0, what is really, and we can handle this a couple of different ways, okay? We can either do this as a cash flow, or we can put it in as normal, sort of present value, future value, okay? Do you have a preference of which way we do it? Normal is in what?
I don't want to do the cash flow one, I want to do the,
All right, so,
Yeah, the easier.
well, they're both easy. It's just I'm going to do both. Okay, simple as that. All right, so let's start off. Let's do the cash flow one. All right, so the cash flow one is going to be basically you're going to take the $2 billion and you're going to subtract out the $4 million. Okay, so $2 billion minus $4 million is going to mean out of pocket, the lender is going to be $1996, so $1.96 billion, okay? And that's going to be out of pocket or as a cash flow, okay? Does that make sense? Yes or no? Then the cash inflows are going to be 120 million as a cash flow, and that's going to occur a total of how many times? No, 9. 9 times, and then the 10th cash flow is going to be the 120 million plus the 2 billion. Okay, and that is going to be the final cash flow. Then you are going to simply solve for internal rate of return. Okay, so let's start with that one. Hopefully I counted out the right number of zeros. And whoever gave us the billion thing, well, you can blame them. Okay, so I get 6 point, if I'm rounding, 11. It's actually 6.10925, blah, 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 but 6.11 will work. Okay, does everybody get that? If you're not getting that, it's probably you have too many zeros or too few zeros, okay?
I got 6.027.
Well, you did something wrong.
I got that as well.
That's what I got.
6.03.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay, we'll try one more time. 1996. Okay, cash flow. 120. Cash flow. 9.
That's 6.02.
Add in too many zeros. 20 plus 2 billion. Cash flow. I don't know, I did it the second time. I might make mistakes, but yeah, it's 6.027. So clearly I put something in wrong. 6.03. Just goes to show you, even I can make mistakes. All right. I know, it's spoiled you. All right. So let's take a look at how to do it the other way. All right, so let's clear everything out. All right, so with this, you're going to put in 10 as your term, so 10 in.
What way is this? The
This
other
is just a normal sort of present value, future value. Okay? You're going to put in basically 120 million as your payment being received. You're going to put your net outflow of being 1,996,000 as your present value. You're going to put in 2 billion as your future value, and then you're going to solve for the interest rate.
This is still one payment a year?
Yes. Yep. 6.027 or 6.03 rounded. Okay? Everybody good with that? Okay, so once again, you can work it out either way. It doesn't really matter. You're going to get the same answer. Okay? Any questions about that? All right, so once again, all we're simply saying here, now why is their yield or their internal rate of return greater than 6%?
Origination fees.
Because of the origination fee, okay? That is the impact, that extra little 0.03% is all due to the origination fee of the $4 million up front, okay? Everybody good?
Great.
Okay, now. Okay,
So the lender's yield just includes the origination fee, whatever?
yes. Yes. Okay, now, if you take a look at, once again, the handout here for a second, and kind of what they've done in terms of the first scenario is not selling off the loan, okay? And so just to kind of work through the mechanics of the handout problem to kind of make it basically equivalent to what we just did. So they've got a situation of 500 million, okay? And they're saying that their origination profit 0.2%. Which would be $1 million. Okay, now obviously this handout is in millions, so that's why they went ahead and just kind of truncated. So you see, it's kind of almost hidden there because you don't really pay attention to it. But you see in year one, okay, and you see just a 1. Well, down below, you see what I'm saying? On the origination profit line, it has the 0.2%, and then next to that, in year 1, it has 1. That's what this is, the $1 million. Okay, does everybody see me or understand that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, in this case, they're telling you that the interest rate is 7% on this pool. Okay? So in this case, we've got $500 million. And the interest rate would be 0.07. Or 35 million a year. Okay, so once again, what they're doing is they're just sort of truncating off, and they're saying, all right, if you look at that interest payment stream line, the 7% is going to yield 35 million, or 35 on this sheet, because once again, we're talking about millions of dollars, all right? And that's gonna be the case for the full 10 years, all the way across. Is everybody cool? Make sense? All right. Then, the next line item is to simply say, all right, what is gonna be the lender cash flow? Now, what they have done in this particular case is they're saying that that loan origination fee is really occurring at the end of year one, as opposed to whenever the loan is being originated. I would argue that it really should be done whenever the loan is originated, but I'm gonna go ahead and let you do it either way. I don't really care, okay? But the reality is that will sort of push out that dollar amount one full year as opposed to really collecting it whenever you really do. So in that case, what they've got for their cash flows is, all right, they've made the loan for $500 million. If we do it as a cash flow, then the first cash flow is going to be actually 36 because it's the 35 plus the 1 million loan origination fee, which kind of screws things up, to be honest, to do it that way. And then 35 as a cash flow for basically 8 years. And then basically in year 10, you're going to have then the 35 plus the 500 or 535 as your final cash flow, and then you're going to solve for the internal rate of return. Or, and this is where, this is why whenever I said that it makes it complicated, because we really can't do it the other way correctly, because we don't have a constant cash flow. In other words, let me show you what I'm talking about. We can put in 500 as our present value. We can put in 10 years as our term. We can even put in the 535 as our future value. But what we can't really do is put in 35 as our payment, because technically the first year, as the way they've done it, is 36. Okay, I've never seen it done this way before, okay? In all the years I've been doing this, because you collect that money up front. I mean, you collect it whenever the loan is originated. So why they chose to lump it in into year one as opposed to the year of origination, I don't really know, because interestingly enough, if you look down below at the second example, there, they do put it at at time period 0 in the year of issuance. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So my assumption is that potentially they either made a mistake or, so let's try and just see what we get with approaching it these two different ways. All right, so we put it in, solve for interest rate, and let's see which one of these comes up to 7.03. Okay, so 500, present value, 10 years, 535 as our future value, 35 as our payments.
Shouldn't our present value be $4.99 in the right
Well,
side?
okay, well that's what I'm saying, that, okay.
But like for this to even have like a comparable like.
Okay, so let's just say we do it that way. All right, $4.99, present value, 10 years,
Is that typical for all?
535, and 35 as the payment. I get 7.523. So what you guys are getting?
I got 70285.
What the? Something must be wrong.
You're putting your future value as 535, but I think you just need to put it as 500 because like the payment in year 2.
Oh, well, yeah, sure. Yep, you're right.
What?
Like his future value incorporated
Yeah, you're
year
right.
10 payment.
That's what is wrong. Man. I like these mistakes I'm making. Okay. Present value, 10 years, 500, future value, 35 as payment, interest rate, yep, there we go. All right, 7.0285. Okay, and over here, let's see if it changes that much. And I get 7.0266. So the reality is we can't really tell which one was right or wrong relative to this example because they rounded off at 7.03 and both of those basically round off to 7.03, okay? My personal preference, I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and you know, I think I see, no, I'm trying to say that that's maybe what they did, but that really should be in the first year. Or not first year, but at the time of origination. How do you guys want to do it? Because I want everybody to be consistent on how you do it on the quiz. Would you prefer to do it basically where it's like this and everything is encapsulated up front? Or would you prefer to do it like this where it's 1 year off? Which
The
one?
right one.
To the right?
Yeah, the present value, future value one.
Okay. All right. So for the quiz today, the assumption will be, regardless of what you see on this sheet, you will make the assumption that all of the loan origination fees are occurring basically here at time period 0. Is everybody cool with that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Instead of the year one.
Instead of year
Affecting the
1.
present value.
In other words, go ahead and just do this on this handout. Change right now. Take your pen, move that $1 from year 1 over to origination. Okay? I'm just gonna probably put it up here on the
If we
screen.
do that, then does it matter? We can still do the cash flow one. Let's do it.
Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about.
Well, I get it. But then you would just have to add it to the original.
Well,
cash
what I'm
flow.
saying is to be consistent with every other material I have ever used in 30 years teaching this, I have never once ever seen them put the origination fee at the end of year 1. It just doesn't make any sense because that occurs whenever you get the loan, not a year from now. So in my opinion, that's a mistake, okay? So, all right, let's see if this thing will warm up and project.
Professor, well, how come we don't do the same thing on the cash flow model that we did on the present value model? Reduce the 500 to 499.
Well, no, we would. That's my point. We would. But this was when we were working it as it's written.
Right.
So if we do that, then it's going to be basically 499. Then this is going to be 9 years, and then it should then give us the 285.
Correct, I got that.
Okay, just remember that. Okay. So here's what I'm asking you to do. So basically, you're going to move that over to here. That means now that will be 499. Okay. And let's see. And then in terms of the lender profit, basically, yeah, that should be the same. Do the calculation there. Okay, is that okay with everybody? Yes? Everybody understands why I did what I did? Yes? Okay. Now, let's take, all right, we've got this scenario. the top scenario is the case where the lender holds the loan in-house for the full maturity, they don't sell it off, okay? So it's not a CMBS deal. It's just, here's our portfolio of loans, we've made them, we've got our loan origination fee, we've held it for 10 years, that's our rate of return, okay? Is everybody cool with that? The bottom half is making the assumption, pull up a little bit here. The bottom half is making the assumption that we still have sort of a portfolio of 500 million, but we are able to churn that portfolio by as quickly as we can make the loans into 4 portfolios, okay? And the idea, in other words, is just like we make $500 million worth of loans, and then immediately we sell those off. We make another $500 million of loans, immediately we sell those off. We make another $500 million of loans, we immediately sell those off. We do that 4 times. Okay, is everybody following me? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so what that means is here we've got the CMBS pools per year of 4, okay? And so once again, what they're making the assumption is that they're saying you're actually just doing this once a year, okay? And if you do this and you get, in essence, 200, basically, yeah, be not 500 million, but 2 billion worth of loans, then in essence, the origination profit for that at the 2% would be 4 million each year, okay? And then this is the part that then becomes sort of new, is the pool packaging and the issuance cost. So they're basically saying that for each of these portfolios or pools of loans, it's costing you $8 million per pool or $32 million total, okay? Does that make sense? All right. Now, with that, then what they're in essence saying is that for the pool, you're getting $518 off of the sale of the pool. Now, where that number is coming from is a sort of a given, okay? So saying that is the price that the investors are willing to pay for this pool of loans, okay? It's not really calculated in any sort of a meaningful way. It's just simply saying, all right, you've made this pool of loans for 500 million, you're able to sell it off to someone else for 518 million. Now, the question that you should be asking is, how can you sell off a portfolio of, once again, 500 million for 518 million? What is the value add? Well, part of the value add is going to be those other sources of income that we had talked to the purchaser, that we talked about previously. They're going to get the interest payments, they're going to get prepayment penalties, they're going to get servicing fees and so forth, okay? All right? And so, but we're not really worried about what their return is in this calculation. What we're worried about is our return as the original or originator of this pool of loans. Does that make sense? Okay? So from our perspective, what's really happening here is that we're getting sort of these proceeds, you know, of this amount each year. Basically, it's just taking the 18 and in essence multiplying it by 4, so 72, all right? And then the total cash flow that we would be sort of out for any given year is going to be the 500 of the loans originated and then the $8 or $8 million that we're spending on the pool packaging. So that's in essence our initial outflow on this deal. But then every year that we're basically going through and we're making all of these loans and ultimately getting a net after packaging cost and after the sale of the proceeds, we're getting a net of $44 million a year for the next 10 years. And then at the end of all of this, then we get in essence the total reversion in this case off of this of the 500 of the return of principal plus then that final 44. And then if you put that in, which we're going to do right now, then you would be able to calculate your IRR for yourself as a lender of 8.56. Okay? So let's just do that real quick. So, what we're concerning ourselves with is just really the bottom line of the lender cash flow. And so in this case, you're going to have the 508 as our present value, $44 as payment, and then at the end of the 5 years, we get back the 500. That's going to be our future value. We don't include the full 44 because that is already embedded within the 44 for the 10-year period. Oops. And then now we should be able just to calculate our rate of return on that. Let's just see what happens. Okay. Now, if we did it as a cash flow, okay, then in essence, still have the 508 as our cash flow. In this case, the way that they've got it set up, be 44 as cash flow occurring 9 times. And then, in essence, 500 plus the 44 as our final cash flow, and then solve for internal rate of return. Oops. Okay, let's double check and make sure we get the same answer. We do. Basically 8.56. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay. Now, what I would potentially ask you to do on the quiz as it relates to this is, what if we basically just simply say, I want you to change maybe the interest rate on the payment stream, or I want you to change the amount being charged as a loan origination fee. All right? So all you would need to do on the quiz is basically make those adjustments, okay, and then resolve or solve for the internal rate of return. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do, so I'm kind of giving you the preview, is you're going to have this sheet, and then I'm going to basically say on the quiz, I want you to potentially change the interest rate or change the loan origination fee, and then you've got to flow through and figure out what basically the new rate of return would be for the lender. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. Now then the last little piece of this, in terms of calculations, is just to kind of walk us through. Now if you take a look in your book, figure 16.2, I'll pop it up over here. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at this quick little example. So once again, kind of using those same numbers that they use on obviously this, Okay, we've got a situation of where the lender has $500 million in underwriting capacity. In other words, underwriting capacity simply means that's the amount of money they have on hand to be able to lend out. Okay, so what they do, they originate, obviously, $500 million worth of those loans. Then their cost of putting everything together in terms of packaging all of these into a deal. And I'm sort of wondering, what does it really mean in terms of the packaging? Well, think of it like this. It's all the paperwork, all the documentation, all of the sort of who are the borrowers, what are their, well, what's the interest rate, what is the term, all of that sort of stuff, all put together, and basically it's the practical reality is it's an extremely long spreadsheet, okay, that in essence shows all of these different characteristics about these loans in that pool, and then an investor is able to look at, in essence, that spreadsheet with all those individual loans, all the individual characteristics, and then ultimately, you know, get a sense for, you know, what has really taken place. But the point is, the lender is not necessarily the one that goes through and does that packaging. Typically, that's done by some other third party, something, you know, like a Goldman Sachs, okay? And Goldman Sachs would basically, okay, the lender would send all of the loan information to Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs would then put all that information together in terms of packaging the deal so that here are all the loans contained within it, here are all the parameters, here's all the documentation, everything self-contained. And then in terms of issuance, what takes place is then Goldman Sachs would then issue those sort of bonds into the market, the CMBS, the commercial mortgage-backed securities, into the marketplace. Individuals, or in most cases, pension funds would be the purchasers of those, and then subsequently that cost of going through all of that is what the lender would have to pay to, in essence, Goldman Sachs. So that's what that basically $8 million is. Okay, does that make sense? Yep.
This is almost like a version of an IPO, but
It is.
like that.
It is. It's very similar. It's just all they're doing is they're just repackaging all this into one big, massive pool and then selling it off.
They're separating it from my company, making it its own entity,
Yes.
and then selling it off to the public like
Correct.
an IPO.
Yep. Okay. But unlike an IPO, I mean, this, you know, it's pretty much fixed cash flows. So, you know, an IPO, you know, there's all the sort of hubbub of, oh, what is the rate of return really going to be, you know, on this company, you know, stock. Whereas this, it's basically a portfolio of bonds.
Set.
Yeah, and it pretty much set returns for the most part, okay? The only time that it gets weird is on those bottom tranches of loans that we had talked about previously, where, in essence, somebody prepays their loan or somebody defaults on their loan, and you've got to try to figure out what those costs are going to be, and so therefore the pricing of those can be a little bit more tricky, whereas the actual sort of top A or tranche A and tranche B or whatever, you pretty much know what the rate of return is going to be. Okay, make sense? All right, so you go through all that sort of brain damage, and ultimately the whole thing is sold off for $518 million, and then of that, you, as the local lender, get to keep $10 million. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. All right, any questions about that? Everybody understands the process? Okay? Yes?
Could you just clarify, going back to kind of the issuance of the CMBS pools on the worksheet,
Yep.
you were saying that we would have to like change an interest rate. Did you mean like change the origination fee rate?
Potentially.
To like I don't understand what you were saying we might have to change and how it would relate to the end result of that equation.
Okay. Here, on this example, so blow it up a little bit, shrink it back down. Okay, so what you would be doing is potentially changing that interest rate and potentially that origination profit, and what the flow-through effect of changing those would be.
Thank you.
Okay? All right. Okay, so that gets us through the first three items on the little quiz, okay? All right, now, one of the things that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about are what are servicers and what is their role in this whole process. We talked a little bit about servicing in the sense that the servicer, in essence, it's a company that is set up for the sole purpose of collecting payments from the borrowers. In other words, they're making their mortgage payments, processing those payments, posting those payments to their accounts, and then in the instance of CMBS servicers, they're also then, once everything has been posted, then remitting or sending a check, in essence, to the bondholders of the CMBS bonds or securities, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, that is a role of the servicer. Now, so the servicer is basically, they're processing billions and billions of dollars worth of payments potentially every month, okay? Of just literally collecting in the checks, posting, processing, you know, getting all the checks remitted. So you kind of got really three different types of servicers. If you want to really kind of get into the nitty gritty a little bit, your book only really talks about two of them, which is just the normal servicer, which I described. Then there's also what's called a master servicer, and the master servicer is the one that, in essence, takes, if you've got multiple portfolios or multiple pools that may be owned by a singular entity like a pension fund. So pension fund X owns this $100 million pool of loans, this $200 million pool of loans, this $150 million pool of loans, and so forth. And the master servicer basically goes through and takes all those sort of rolled up payments from each of those pools, consolidates everything, and then remits whatever payments need to be made to the overall kind of umbrella owner, if there is one. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Then we have the third one, which your book does talk about, which is the special servicer. Okay, the special servicer has one primary function, and that is to deal with non-performing loans. Once again, the special servicer's role is to deal with non-performing loans. Once again, the special servicer's responsibility is to deal with non-performing loans. Now, what we mean by that is that if a loan defaults, okay, in other words, the borrower doesn't pay their mortgage, the special servicer is the one that jumps in and basically takes control, okay?
Of the property.
Of the property, okay? They pre-foreclosure. This is kind of like, because they have special rights to be able to sort of say, you're not paying your mortgage, therefore we have the right to jump in before this gets so bad that it does end up in foreclosure. So they can, in essence, come in and say, all right, Cole, you haven't been making your mortgage payment for the past couple of months, we're now going to take over and we're going to start managing this property. We don't want to do that, but we're going to because you haven't been paying us, we want to get paid. And so they have the authority to come in and basically do what's called a lockbox on all the payments. So they can simply say, all future payments now will come to us instead of going to you, all right? So they start collecting the payments on your behalf, and then any dispersals that need to be made, they will be the ones responsible for deciding what, you know, in essence gets paid, what doesn't. And part of it you're sort of saying, well, are they just automatically assuming that you're doing a poor job of managing the property? Not necessarily, but they want to make sure that you're not trying to basically siphon off any sort of income for yourself, you know, off of these properties. They want to ensure that they are being paid first.
So
Does that make
not
sense?
only
Now, ultimately, what would happen is they would actually try to make a concerted effort to get the property more fully occupied and so forth, because at the end of the day, they don't want to go down the road of actual foreclosure. They don't want to have to put the thing on the auction block. They want to try to salvage what they can, but they're basically taking you out of the picture as the borrower and pretty much saying, for all intents and purposes, you really no longer exist, okay? We're now in control of the asset, and we're going to manage it as we see fit in order to go from a non-performing asset into hopefully a performing asset. Now, in some cases, they can't fix it. And in the worst case scenario, they're saying this property is a complete dud. There's just no way of fixing this. The market has completely changed and evolved and whatever else. It's time to divest of this property, and they have the authority and the ability to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
So where's the borrower in this?
The borrower's pretty much almost out of the picture at this point because
Their investment.
this is one of the kind of unique features of the CMBS sort of industry is that the lender has been given much more control over the asset for non-performance. Now here's the thing. I gave kind of the extreme example. You just stop paying your mortgage. But that's not the only thing that can trigger the special servicer. The special servicer can be triggered if you simply don't hit a certain occupancy level, okay, in the property, or you don't maintain a certain debt service coverage ratio, or you know, there's whatever metrics that they set out in the original loan documents, they can say, you are not in financial default, you are in technical default, okay? There's a difference. Financial default means you're not paying the bill, you're not paying the mortgage. Technical default means you have not met or are not currently meeting some sort of special provision within the loan documents, like maintaining a 85% occupancy rate in the property, or not maintaining a 1.3 debt service coverage ratio, okay? Now you're saying, well, how do they know all of that? This gets back to one of our discussions from the previous weeks. They require that you typically submit operating statements for the property once a month, okay? Those get uploaded electronically, and they will have a whole staff that basically is looking at nothing but these operating statements and the kind of an artificial intelligence sort of thing of basically looking for any sort of outliers, looking for non-compliance issues. You know, they're basically going through the operating statement and saying, okay, does it show 85% or greater occupancy rate? Okay, it does, everything's okay. If it doesn't, everything's not okay, you end up on what's called a watch list, meaning that now you're under surveillance, okay? And I use that term, that's the actual term they call for. They have a surveillance department, okay? And that surveillance department is looking at what is taking place with that property sort of in real time. And so if your occupancy rate goes from the pre-described, whatever it was, 85% to something lower than that, they want to know why. And that surveillance department is out there literally trying to find out why. What has happened to allow that to happen, okay? Does that make sense? Was it the property owner's fault? Was it market driven? Was it the property manager? Was it, you know, a tenant? You know, what happened? And they want to know what happened and why it happened and whether or not they should be concerned about it as to, are they going to get paid in the future? Does that make sense? Okay? Same sort of thing, as I said, you know, that's one metric is the occupancy rate, but another is, in essence, the annual debt service or debt service coverage ratio, meeting that or not. Because occupancy can be manipulated, okay? You could very easily, all right, let's say that I've got an empty property. I've got 10 units. What could I do? I could drag 10 people off the street, have them pay nothing in rent. The property's now 100% occupied, right? So that's why they're going to have multiple metrics, you know, to be able to look at. That's just one of what they're looking at. But like the debt service coverage ratio is going to be of utmost importance to them as well, because that's going to say, are you generating enough income off of this property in order to basically meet that debt service coverage ratio? If you are, okay. If you're not, you're once again, you're put under surveillance on a watch list. Does that make sense? Okay. But the special servicer is the one that basically deals with all that, okay? They have the most interesting job of all the servicers, okay? Because the normal servicers, it is just plug into the system, you know, process. But the special servicers are actually out there in the field dealing with these problem properties and trying to get them fixed, okay? So that everybody gets paid. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions about that? Yep.
What's the standard debt service coverage ratio that's
Like what we've done, you know, for the most part, like in this class, I mean, the lowest, if we're dealing with apartment communities that have all sorts of government associated guarantees and things like that, I've seen as low as 1.15, but I would say that the typical standard is going to be probably 1.25, you know, but then again, if you've got a crazy property with a lot of potential risk, they may require 1.3, 1.4, you know, even 1.5. You know, it's not an absolute set number, you know, in the sense that every lender is not going to be the same. You know, one lender may say, okay, all you got to maintain is the 1.2, another one says you got to maintain 1.3. Well, that's a point of distinction and differentiation that matters and should matter to you as the borrower, because the one that says you only have to maintain a 1.2, that's an easier loan condition to meet, and therefore you're not probably going to be in technical default on. Whereas over here, having to meet that 1.3, there's a you know, much greater burden on you to make sure that you meet that metric. Does that make sense? Now here's the thing, and I think I may have said this in one of the previous discussions about the CMBS thing, and this is really important. Historically, the local lender didn't really care about occupancy rates and debt service coverage ratios after the loan was made, okay? They cared about it up front when the loan was made, but once the loan was made, their thing was just pay us. We're gonna leave you alone, we're not gonna get in your business, we're not gonna be probing around and all these different, you know, getting all this extra information from you. As long as you pay us every month, we're not even gonna, you know, you're not gonna see us, you're not gonna hear from us, nothing. Does that make sense? You move into the CMBS world, number one, you're gonna get a lower interest rate than the traditional lender, okay? But they're gonna impose all of these extra restrictions on you and all of this extra sort of documentation that you're gonna have to provide to them. And if you ever screw up and you end up in technical default or actual, you know, financial default, there are going to be lots of fees and charges associated with that. Does that make sense? Okay, questions?
Are those servicers like a relationship you have from the beginning, or are they the special ones, or do they come in only when it's going downhill?
They are tied to that particular CMBS pool. And what will happen is there are a handful of really large servicers, commercial real estate servicers in the country, and they each compete for the servicing rights to those pools of loans. So in other words, they have to bid to, let's say, like the Goldman Sachs of the world, to basically say, hey, we're interested in being the servicer for that pool of loans. Here's how much we're willing to basically pay you, or here's how much of a fee we're willing to take on to be that servicer. Does that make sense? Okay? Because one of the ways that they historically were able to make a lot of money in a higher interest rate environment was on float. And what I mean by that was your mortgage payment is, let's say, due beginning of the month. Okay? The first of the month, your mortgage payment is due. And that's due to the servicer, okay? But they, as the servicer, in their contract and their agreement, maybe didn't have to remit the payment to the end owner of that portfolio of loans until the 15th or maybe even the 30th of the month. So they would get to keep all of those payments for, let's say, 2 weeks or 30 days, and in essence, invest that money and earn interest off of it. Well, at first, you're saying, okay, big deal. Well, okay, if you're So like one of the servicers that I consulted for, this is back in 2000, they were getting $50 billion worth of mortgage payments every single month. Okay, so if you can hold $50 billion hostage for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks before you have to basically remit it to the actual, owner of that portfolio, and now you're saying, okay, fine, they get to do that, all right, so they, 50 billion, and they get to do that, that month, okay, fine. No, think of that, 12 months a year. It's to a certain extent, it's almost like having a savings account of $50 billion permanently, because it rolls over every single month. So what they're able to do is invest that money in short-term, overnight securities, or securities with maturities of a week or 2 weeks or whatever it may be, and then earn the interest. Now, in this sort of an interest rate environment where interest rates are so ridiculously low, they're not making as much money as they were making back whenever interest rates were 7, 8, 9, 10%, because those short-term basically rates that they could get were much higher. Okay, but suffice to say, it's one of the ways the servicer made money in addition to whatever fee or charge that they may be paid. Okay, does that make sense? All right, any questions? Yep.
So that's the money that, when you hear about both these overnight, the banks
Yep.
loaning money overnight,
Yep.
that's where the,
But you have no control if your mortgage was sold, right?
No, I'm sorry?
You have no control if your mortgage was sold, so like,
Okay, you do and you don't. Whenever you sign your original mortgage documents, typically a couple of lines in there, this loan may be assigned or sold to someone else, or to a CMBS, and it's pretty much a standard line that you're going to see in most of the loan agreements. Now, you can try up front to, whether it's to negotiate with the lender, or in some cases, this lender is just, they want to keep the loans on hold because they have an infinite supply of capital. Perfect case in point, and the reason, once again, Texas. Okay? In Texas, you have a number of banks that are backed by oil money. Okay? And so basically, you have these folks with lots and lots of oil money. They simply want to put to a more productive use, and so they're perfectly happy basically owning this little, small bank in the middle of Texas, and whatever commercial mortgage loans they make, they keep right there in that bank. They never get sold off to anyone else. Whereas, but if you go to, a typical Bank of America or Wells Fargo or whatever, you're pretty much almost automatically going to have to assume that loan's going to be sold off to somebody else. Does that make sense? Okay.
This doesn't only apply to CMBS, this also applies to regular commercial mortgages as well too.
Well,
The
okay,
whole process.
the point being is, the way in which commercial mortgages are sold off for the most part is almost exclusively through the CMBS market. Okay? On the residential side, you also have residential mortgage-backed securities. We don't really talk about those, here, but in essence, it's the same general concept, except there are lots more restrictions because of the rules associated with what can be charged of a borrower if they're a single-family home or residential mortgage, compared to the commercial mortgage where the barn door is much more wide open. And by that, what I mean is, okay, if you had a choice of owning and operating a residential mortgage-backed securities business or a commercial mortgage-backed securities business, all other things being equal, you're going to make a lot more money, more than likely, off the commercial side than you will off the residential side, because you have a lot more freedom in terms of the charges and the fees and the stipulations and requirements and everything else that you can place upon the borrowers that you can't really do because of all the added regulation on the residential side. Does that make sense?
as
Yes,
a
sir.
lender.
As a lender,
Right.
okay? There are a lot of protections out there for
Was that after
the typical residential, borrower. I'm sorry, what?
Was that after the 2008?
No, the most of those sort of borrowing regulations were probably in the 1960s and 1970s. the Truth in Lending Act, I don't know what year specifically that was passed, I should know, but probably you can just look it up, Google it. Truth in Lending Act, Regulation Z, and it would tell you what year that was, but that's almost all exclusively for residential. Okay, the commercial side is pretty much buyer beware, barn door wide open to be able to do almost anything they want to do, because the idea is these are sophisticated players. They should know better, you know, in terms of what they're doing or they're not doing. They should have an attorney that reads over whatever documentation they're being given. And too bad, so sad if they weren't aware of something. Okay. All right. Yep. Cool.
What is the, you said they invest in short-term securities, like what does that look like?
It's going to be like overnight deposits in many cases that are you know, going to be available through either a commercial bank that or a corporation that may have these short-term securities that they can purchase. But you know, it's a very, it's like commercial paper would be another example, but it's a very short-term kind of where, and the only people that are pretty much doing that are lending institutions and these sort of commercial mortgage-backed security servicers. They're the biggest market for that because they have funds that need to be invested short-term. Well, actually, another good example, payroll for companies, all right? Every company does it a little bit differently, but if you have the choice as the owner of a company, I know I'm getting a little bit off track, but this is actually, it's directly relevant. If you had the opportunity as an owner to say, we're going to pay our people once a week, twice a month, or once a month, what would you prefer and why if you were the owner of that company?
Once a month.
Once a month. Because in essence, the idea is, okay, I'm going to work, I'm going to do all my work as an employee. You as my employer don't have to make any payments to me until the end of that month once I've done my work for that month, correct? Whereas the weekly, okay, I do my you know, work on every Friday or whatever, I get paid and so forth. Well, think about if you've got big payrolls. I mean, we're talking about massive payrolls, like state payrolls or university payrolls, all right? If you delay the payments, once again, it gets back to that whole float, you know, sort of situation of being able, the state of Texas did this many years ago, where they were paying the state of Texas employees twice a month, and then they had a state comptroller that came in and said, you know what, we can earn literally millions upon millions upon millions of dollars every year if we start paying the employees once a month. Because we get an extra 2 weeks of being able to take all of that money and keep it invested in short-term overnight securities. And that's when interest rates were, once again, substantially higher than what they are now. And it generated a lot of extra revenue for the state. Now, the downside, you as an employee are like, I only get paid once a month, you know, instead of every 2 weeks. Make sense? Does that kind of help answer? Okay. All right. Other questions? Okay. Let's move on. Okay. Now, in just a handful of words, just think about the space that you have on the quiz and how much words, you know, how many words you can write. Okay. What would be the purpose of tranching loans?
To defer the good loans and bad loans? Quality of what you're buying?
Okay, maybe it's quality of what you're buying, but what else?
Diversify.
Okay, diversify in what way?
The risks associated
Okay,
as well as
diversify the risk. Because what does tranching accomplish? I mean, okay, you got, let's say, kind of like what we went through.
It's like preferred investors versus general investors.
You can sell garbage
It
for
slices
money.
it up into.
Get a larger pool of investors.
Okay, you get a larger pool of investment, but more specifically, okay, you've got, let's say, tranche A, that's your best one, yes?
Yes.
Tranche B, second best, tranche C, third best, and so forth, so on. So the tranche A people get paid first. They have a risk return profile that is different than tranche B, which is different than tranche C, okay? So the purpose of the tranching is to do what?
Just make sure that the
Open the
higher
investing
assumption
pool.
is paid. Takes precedence.
diversify the risk return profiles
Make-
available to
make it-
investors?
Make it available to whoever has money.
Okay,
Because then-
all right. You need to think about how you're gonna express that in 10 words or less, okay? Because in essence, the whole idea of tranching is pretty much to stratify, in essence, the risk return profiles to investors.
So you're matching the risk to the investor's,
Yes.
return profile.
Right.
It's like in economics, like the stair step like demand, where like you would offer like senior citizens discounted rates and children discounted rates. You could capture all the demand at like each incremental level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So you,
So once again, it's just, you're stratifying basically the risk return. You're sort of segmenting it. You're creating niche investment opportunities for basically different types of investors.
for the same product, just based on like their return and what their risk.
Right. Okay? All right, moving forward. Okay, now, moving into, the rest of this should go pretty quickly and pretty easily. All right.
I'm gonna all of a sudden get sick.
All right.
My notes are looking like
One of the fundamental things, and I've kind of thrown in some of these things that are sort of fundamental we need to sort of talk about, that you need to be familiar with, and so forth. There are three primary approaches to valuation of commercial real estate, okay? One of those approaches, the one that we tend to give the most deference, the most weight to, is going to be the income approach. That's pretty much what we've been spending, all of our time on, in here. We spend all of our time on, really, in the investments course. Everything fundamentally comes down to what is the income the property generates relative to the value. And we've always kind of fallen back on our good little ERV model and saying, all right, we've got $10,000 a year of income, we've got a cap rate of 10%, that means that our value, is going to be $100,000. Okay, that simple sort of relationship. All right, and this obviously this income number is almost always going to be expressed in an annual. Okay, so if you're given a monthly number, you've got to convert it to annual. Okay, because that is what we are specifically, dealing with here. This is an annual income number, okay? And then ultimately, solving for the value is going to be based on what the annual, typically net operating income is going to be and what the cap rate is going to be, okay? Now, so any potential, downsides of this model, okay? If someone were to ask you, okay, is it flawed in any way, or what are maybe the weaknesses of it, how would you respond?
The cap rate,
Okay, in what way?
based on opinion.
Okay, the cap rate, in many cases, can be very subjective, from one market to another, from one investor to another. I mean, and as we've said, most of the time that cap rate is going to be determined by simply what was the income that a property had and what did it sell for, and you sort of back into it for previous sales, okay? And based upon that, then that is kind of how the cap rate sort of gets set by the market. And then you would simply say, okay, well, if that's what they've all been selling for in terms of the cap rate in this market, then that's how we're going to price everything from this point forward for the foreseeable future until some other countervailing force significantly changes, in the sense of, do we have a higher supply of product in the market, lower supply, do interest rates change, has there been a fundamental shift in rent rates going up or down, that sort of thing, okay? Any other issues with basically this basic little model of the income approach?
What about like the NOI, the vacancy rates, you could be off?
Okay, so all of the assumptions that go into that income number we're solving for NOI, but to get to NOI, we start out with potential gross income, we subtract out vacancy and collection losses, we add in other income, that gives us expected gross income, we subtract out the total operating expenses, and it gives us net operating income. So you've got all of these other variables that basically can be potentially manipulated, could potentially be inaccurate, could potentially be changed from 1 month to 1 year to the next. So, it's a lot of different assumptions that, in essence, are going into what that number is. Now, obviously, as we've talked about, one of the things that we strive for is to come up with what we would call a what? Stabilized NOI, which means that hopefully it's reliable, predictable, that we know that it's going to be pretty much the same from one period to the next. The extent to which there is variability in any of these, that means risk, okay? And from a finance perspective, those of you with any sort of finance background, with higher risk, you then would demand a higher return, okay? Thus, kind of gets into the whole cap rate thing, and so the whole thing of where, if you've got think about it like this, the most stable sort of form of real estate, probably the least amount of complexity is what?
Single tenant.
No. Well, single tenant, but
Residential.
property type. Not necessarily residential.
Property type.
Industrial. Specifically, most like warehouse space, in the sense that you probably will have a single user, but it's just a very predictable, kind of reliable, sort of income stream, in the sense that there are long-term tenants, usually at a low, sort of rental rate, and and it's like one tenant is there or they're not there. Now, in the event that you have a tenant that is unstable, then that can make that property type very unstable. But if you've got a stable tenant that, for many years, once again, you're pretty comfortable that they're going to be able to survive long term, then that's probably one of the best, kind of situations to have, is to have that, industrial user. But I would say second best is what, Jacqueline said, that residential, okay? There, if you've got like this multi-unit, sort of residential community, and you manage to get it pretty much fully leased and occupied and that sort of thing, typically, that's going to be perceived as being a fairly low risk kind of investment to make, okay? You've got a lot of different tenants. Yeah, the turnover can eventually be pretty high depending on the market. But yeah, those two property types, industrial and residential, are probably going to have the lowest cap rates. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, probably the highest cap rate is going to probably go to hospitality industry, okay? In terms of hotels, resorts, that sort of thing, because they're really at the whim of everything. They're at the whim of just, people traveling, whether they're business travelers, whether they're resort travelers, whether the economy is doing well, whether it's not doing well, whether, gas prices are high or they're low, whether, it's like there's so many different factors that can influence the viability of those kind of properties, that the risk profile is going to be usually probably the highest on those, and then followed by that would probably be retail, and then followed by that probably office, okay? All right, but the point is, simply put, that the risk level or rate of return is really driven by that sort of expectation of what that risk is going to be for the income stream and the vacancies and obviously the operating expenses. Okay, yep, cool.
Can you shelter yourself in the hospitality industry? Like you have, for example, like the W brand is pretty well known and it's worldwide, and I guess it would be pretty consistent. But like, if it produces such high income and it's so valuable, like, is there a way to like get into that niche without being exposed to the economy that you're saying?
You mean, in terms of relationships that maybe you have with the end users of your property, is that what you're sort of saying? Or?
No, I mean, like, how can you get into the hospitality niche and like not really be subject to all the economic moves and all the risk associated with it? Is that possible?
I think the best model that I've seen, not used as much here in the U.S., more so in other overseas markets, where you will have the condominium hotels, where you build a traditional hotel, but yet each individual unit within the hotel is owned by an individual, but yet everything is collectively managed by the hotel. And that, like, for example, you know you're going to be in that country or in that city 3 months out of the year. All right, so during that 3 months, you occupy that unit. All right, and you have all your whatever limited personal effects that you would have during that time within that particular space. Then the other 9 months out of the year that you're not there, it goes into a hotel pool, and then the hotel then rents out your unit. You put all of your personal effects into some sort of a locked up locker, for those 9 months of the year that you're not there, and once again, that unit then gets thrown into the pool, it gets rented out, just like every other unit within the building gets rented out, and the risk is not so much on the hotel operator as it is on the individual unit owner. So that's for one extreme of how that you can have some of these properties where they will allow for occupancy by many other people over the course of the year. The reason I know about this, I stayed in one of those when I was teaching in New Zealand. That basically really nice hotel, but once again the owner was away the majority of the year, and so I was able to stay there for several months at a time, and in essence, but it was individually owned.
Have you had any pull to like invest in motels or like smaller hotels at all? Or like, if not,
I personally don't have any interest. No.
Why?
It's just not a property type that has ever interested me. It's a personal choice.
Is that the condo tub?
What, sorry?
Is that a condo tub?
It's sort of, and it is, but at the same time, they are individual units, and they are sort of condominiumized, but at the same time, it's really run like a normal hotel. You wouldn't know, let's put it this way, from the outside or any of the interior operations that it was set up that way, because it has traditional services that a full-service hotel has.
And this type of model you haven't seen in the U.S.
I haven't seen it as much. I mean, there have been a couple of examples, but and sometimes what they'll do here more than often is they'll mix it, and they'll have units that are available for sale, and maybe they can put them on different floors, different access points, and that sort of thing, sort of making the assumption that we want kind of this fixed population of people, here for, year-round, and we'll sort of service them, but at the same time, then the other folks that are more transient, then we'll have those units that are, sort of available for the hotel pool, and and they're maybe treated a little bit differently.
But that's happening more and more now. There's condominium developments that are owners are doing their Airbnb thing.
Right. No, and that's a whole different thing. The Airbnb, then that's an individual thing.
But it's organized.
But see, that sometimes flies in the face of the condo documents and the townhome documents that say that you can't maybe lease your space out,
No, but specifically, I read about buildings being, designed that way.
Yeah.
The whole structure of it, so that that's an option. The amenities, all of the details focused around that.
Yes. No, and I, personally, I think it's a great idea. I think, but it's just, you would expect that much more of that would happen in Florida, because, I mean, one of the things that, we won't get too far off this, but, like, you go to certain cities in Florida, like Naples is a great example. Have you been to Naples? Anybody? Okay. You go over there whenever you're out of season, what do you see? All of these condo towers, pretty much everything is just boarded up, or the shutters are on, and it's just kind of like, no one's there.
Marco Island.
Yeah, I mean, and so you would think that, you know, there would be a more ambitious effort to sort of say, okay, let's try to market these units, you know, the other however many months out of the year. I mean, I know it's not season, but, you know, could you not make those, you know, attractive enough to where that it would make sense to really, you know, put them to more productive use than sitting there empty from whatever it is, April until October, or whatever the non-season is. So.
That's probably too high end, but cities like Nashville and Austin and all those places that is where I read that these things are happening. But what you're talking about is like the old fashioned New York City hotels, where
Like
people
co-op.
really lived in hotels
Right.
too.
Who owns it though? Like it's like the hotel.
Well,
ownership is an
the owner
operator.
would have the full, they would own, in essence, the ground, they would own, in essence, the building, but then the individual units within that building then would be condominiumized.
That's weird.
The
But
Ritz
when you
Carlton
buy-
also does.
I'm sorry?
The Ritz Carlton, you have that option.
The
So it's
residential
for sale.
brand.
But when you buy
SLS
an
in
apartment
Miami.
in a building, you
SLS
only
in
own the
Miami.
rights to
It's a
your
residential.
unit, you
Right.
don't own rights to the building or the
Correct,
ground.
correct. And you have limited rights to begin with, but I don't want to get into all the damn little details on this, but the reality is, it's an option that is available that, you know, if you're one of these sort of seasonal users of the property, this is one way to potentially, you know, hopefully earn income the remainder of the year, but yet you don't have to manage it, you've got someone on site that continually manages it. Okay, yep,
As it pertains to the topic.
yep.
Just what exactly are we, you know, targeting us from a retention standpoint? That-
So all we were saying is, somebody brought up the whole thing of, well, how does the risk differ by property type? And then Cole was the one that threw the curveball question of simply, you know, in terms of hospitality properties, what could you basically create that would be as much of a risk-free hospitality investment as
mitigate some of
possible?
that, yeah.
And that was my long-winded answer to get to that. Okay,
Simple.
moving forward. All right. All right, so we'll finish these up. Do we need to take a break, or we can go ahead good for a few more minutes?
Quick one.
Okay, take a quick 5-minute break.
Fire break.
We can get to these others in another 5-10 minutes, probably.
The whole, all of them, last time.
Yeah, well, depending on what Cole's questions are.
Yeah, I have another one.
We got a lot of modeling to
Like
do.
I've heard in like the hotel industry that it's possible that when you're developing that you can pretty much refinance a lot of your money out after building it. Is that
Because you created so much value?
yeah?
Yeah.
Is that like a realistic play? Because like obviously in multifamily, like the idea is to find an undervalued asset, buy it, refi, and get your money out. But like it's very niche opportunities. But as opposed to like hotels, if you could develop and do that.
The issue with the hotel is if you really can truly create something from nothing. I mean, you know, in the sense that the value that you're creating is not just the bricks and sticks value, it's the underlying business value that goes along with it, because you really kind of got to separate those two. The bricks and sticks, you know, we value as a traditional sort of real estate thing, but the business aspect of all the ancillary services of food and beverage and concierge services and events and all of that other stuff, that's sort of like other income, you know, that can really drive the underlying value. So if you can build a hotel, get it up and operating, you know, and substantiate these extra sources of income, then almost overnight, yeah, you can create a lot of value very quickly.
Can you do that by leveraging another brand?
Sure, I mean, part of it is, yeah, if you pick the right flag for the, you know, the right kind of product that you're offering, and you're gonna have to obviously be held to whatever the standards are for that particular flag, which, you know, the better the flag, the higher the standards, and in essence, the more things that you're gonna have to provide as either services or environment, you know, for the end users.
It just seems like, I mean, if hotels are so profitable.
Well, it can be.
Yeah.
I think that's the operative thing, is it's not that they are automatically more profitable, it's just they can be, it's sort of like a make it or break it for a hotel can be more substantial and more quickly than a lot of other assets, because you sort of make the assumption that the average ordinary hotel might only be able to, in essence, be 50-ish% occupied over the course of a normal calendar year. And if you can all of a sudden move the needle for that particular hotel in that particular location from 50%, let's say, occupancy to all of a sudden 60 or 65 or 70% or higher, then, you know, that can make all the difference in the world of you know, its underlying value. And that's where, you know, a lot of the online, you know, services have really kind of transformed that in a lot of ways, because, you know, obviously many, many years ago, 20 plus years ago, you know, the hotels were relying on centralized booking of, you know, a Marriott or a Hyatt or whatever, but, you know, obviously, as we all know, you know, you get on hotels.com or wherever now, and it services virtually every brand out there. And but the point is that they can, in many cases, get substantially more bookings, you know, through that. But yet they maybe have to accept a lower price point than maybe they would get ordinarily, but yet they can max out their hotel if they release that many more rooms, you know, within those kind of online, you know, sort of environments.
So would that be the asset type where, because essentially one of the dilemmas in real estate would be like, it's hard to make your money in real estate unless you're doing active stuff like flipping or real estate agent to invest. And, you know, if you can buy an asset that's able to produce a lot of money as opposed to like having to have $500,000 to make any type of gross income, like what that strategy would look like.
Well, once again, on the hospitality side, that's one of the things that attracts a lot of people to it, is that if you can consistently keep the property occupied, and generating all these other ancillary forms of revenue, it's very profitable sort of, you know, for the bricks and sticks that you have in place. But it's also, the reputation can be screwed up almost overnight, and then you're doomed. You know, so it's a tough one in terms of, you know, being guaranteed that you're just going to have automatic success with price going, like I said. Because, you know, a lot of it does, you know, hinge on just, you know, how that particular property sits, where it sits within the market. And so you're very lucky that you just happen to have maybe an undervalued, you know, property sitting in prime location that, you know, for whatever reason, it's just never really been capitalized on. It's very rare.
Good? Doesn't sound like, doesn't sound the same road exactly. That or Alabama.
All right, so what they're doing is,
Actually visit somewhere.
got 4 times 8 is 32. And
Yeah, he was my
okay, 18 times 4. 18 times 4. Yep.
Ah.
A little bit of savings.
So where do you grab it from?
Oh my God.
Well, yeah, 4.
That's what
Which is my money that they're gonna come out with.
Right.
Oh, you're right.
And then essentially the interest will go,
So that's
the interest will go to this,
I mean, if I, you know, like.
increase that.
Yeah, but the interest on this model is really irrelevant, because the lender's not receiving any of that. They're only making money, in this scenario, the lender is only making money off of the sale of the loans. The initial origination fee and whatever they're charging in terms of the proceeds.
You said you're gonna change the interest rate on this.
Well,
That's how much they.
The 5 proceeds from the sale, minus the initial investment is 18 times by 4, which is per year. And you see out of that cost to the
Yeah, but like the one where it was like.
because you take 18 by 10 years.
Okay, we're all back?
You know,
That's true.
yeah.
I still think it is okay.
I think I did alright. I got one of them wrong in the middle, but.
Okay.
Like, I was like, what?
Well, that's, all right.
Oh, you like back the points.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, in addition to the income approach to value, we have the sales comparison approach. The sales comparison approach, for the most part in commercial real estate, is a lot more challenging to apply than it is in residential real estate. And the reason for that is it's hard to find similar comparable properties for commercial properties, okay? Because you've got one office building that doesn't necessarily look like another office building. You've got one, you know, sort of industrial property that doesn't exactly look like another industrial property. You've got another retail property that doesn't look like another retail property. Now, you can probably find on the residential side, in terms of apartments that look like other apartments and have similar features and so forth, and make an easier sort of comparison. And certainly on single-family residential, you know, it's very easy to find and make those comparisons from one property to another in terms of what they sell for. But you can also just use the sales comparison approach for land values, all right? And specifically, whenever you're looking for commercial land that's available for sale and looking for properties that have sold within that market, and then trying to make kind of an apples to apples comparison of what basically the price would be per square foot. So let's just say that we've got a parcel of land that's 1 acre, okay? And just out of curiosity, how many square feet are in an acre?
43,560.
Thank you. All right, 1 acre equals 43,560 square feet. That is something every single real estate related person should know. Okay. Now, just out of curiosity, because if that's square feet, then if you had a square parcel.
What is the?
No, I just want to see, so what would that mean that that parcel would be in terms of the number of feet per side?
Take the square root of that number.
It'd be the square root of 43,560.
Correct.
So let's just see, just real quick,
No, you didn't.
43,560 and the square root.
I had to say first one.
Where's the square root button on this?
It's underneath underneath the minus key or subtraction key. All right. So 208.71 basically times 208.71 gives you 43,559.9. So close enough. So the only reason I'm doing this is because I think you need to kind of just put things into perspective to sort of understand how big of a parcel of land are we really talking about when we say an acre lot. Basically, you know, 200 and something feet by 200 and something feet. It's a pretty sizable lot. Because if you think about a lot of lots that in many cases are like 40 feet wide, maybe 50 feet, but 40 feet by maybe, you know, let's say 100, all right? So 40 times 100 is going to be what?
400.
No,
Oh wait, 4,000.
4,000.
Is this on the quiz?
All right, so 4,000 square foot lot. Well, you think about how many of those will fit into basically an acre. Not subtracting out roads, not subtracting out anything else. You basically say about 10 lots would fit into an acre, roughly. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm just trying to put things into perspective for you, just so that you kind of can make that kind of crossover. Okay, now what if I were to tell you that land is selling for, let's say, $20 per square foot, okay? So what does that mean an acre of land is going to sell for? Okay, so 43,560 times $20 a square foot. So $871,200 would be the price of that 1 acre. Does that make sense? Okay, so each lot, you sort of said there'd be about 10 lots in that, roughly 87,000 or about $100,000 a lot or something like that. Okay, make sense? Okay. Now, the sales comparison approach, part of what you would want to be able to do is to sort of say, okay, for either acres of land or individual lots of land, how much has land within that particular subdivision or within, and if we're talking about, once again, commercial space, how much is that land sold for as vacant land, okay? And here's, I guess, one of the things that you have to also put into perspective. I haven't seen it as much here in Florida as I did in Texas, but let's say that you've got this parcel of land, it's an acre of land, and you've got some ramshackle old, just bare bones basic sort of warehouse-ish building sitting on it, okay? My point is the land very easily might be worth more than the building and the land. Okay, and in the sense that you'd be much better off doing what? Scraping the ground clean and then building something new or more intensive in terms of taking, like for example, you go into downtown Fort Lauderdale and you start looking around and you start maybe looking and you see, all right, there's a one-story shopping center, I think at the corner of Broward and Highway 1. And it's just a regular run-of-the-mill sort of shopping center, but you should be saying to yourself, okay, what is surrounding that shopping center? All high-rises. And you've got to kind of wonder to yourself, okay, yeah, that shopping center stays busy, does a lot of business, but you've also got to sort of question yourself, is that the highest and best use for that particular location? Because that shopping center might be worth quite a bit, and if you were to sort of value it just on the land value, what you might find is it really doesn't make any sense to really have that retail use on there. What might make sense is to literally buy the land, scrape the retail off of it, and build a 40, 50-story high-rise, apartment community or whatever it might be. Now, what would preclude you from being able to do that? Well, potentially, yeah. Do the local regulations allow for that intensive of a use on that particular site? Or has it been restricted either, from a height or use perspective of saying, okay, the only thing that they will allow on that parcel currently under current zoning is just retail, and that's it. And so you're limited in what you can do. But you can obviously, search out and find out whether or not you can get a zoning change on the property, and if you could, and go through that whole process, which might take several years, but if you could, then get it rezoned to something that's much more intensive, all of a sudden that land value escalates dramatically. Okay, does that make sense? So,
what about like a long-term lease on the property? Like I know, like the corner you're talking about has a CVS, and I'm pretty sure they tend to do long-term leases.
And that's another thing that you probably have to buy out that lease, from CVS. And so that could be another constraining factor that, you really are limited in what you can do based on, maybe the tenants that are there, okay? Does that make sense? I'm going to take another point of privilege and make another diversion because you just brought up something that actually makes a lot of sense real quick to discuss. It's sort of off topic, but it makes sense to talk about this. One of the things that we've talked about with regard to making commercial loans is you're paying attention as the lender to the cash flows that are being generated by the individual property. But where are those cash flows coming from? those cash flows are coming from the individual tenants of the property, yes? Okay, think about this for a second. I'm gonna come back to this land thing here in a second, because I think this is really important that you kind of think about this. Let's say that we've got a property, let's just say it's a retail property, and you've got 4 different tenants, A, B, C, and D, all right? All in equal spaces, but yet, just like they're sort of categorized, tenant A, B, C, and D, this one is a Class A tenant, this one is Class B, this is Class C, this is Class D, okay? From the lender, in their perspective, should they treat each of those tenants differently? Well, maybe they should. And what I mean by that, differently in the sense of, if I'm making, okay, let's say I own this, all right? And I'm coming to you for the loan, all right? Normally, what we do is we just simply collapse all of the income from these 4 tenants into a singular number of, here is our potential gross income, yes? And then we say, okay, subtract our vacancies and collection losses and other income. Would it not make sense? And some lenders are beginning to do this, is my point in saying this. To say, okay, who are your tenants? And the fact that you've got a Class A tenant, because of that, you like that as the lender. You like it because you know they're going to pay. And they're going to pay on time, and there's not going to be any issue with getting payment from them. They're a stable, secure tenant, yes? Whereas on the other end of the extreme, tenant D over here, sort of, the worst possible tenant, kind of a fly-by-night, sort of tenant that, horrible credit history and so forth, that, you really don't know from one month to the next whether you're going to get rent and if it's going to be late, if it's going to be all the rent that you're owed and yada, yada, yada. Wouldn't you like to take that into consideration as the lender from the standpoint of saying, okay, in essence, I'm willing to give you a lower interest rate on this piece of the property, on this piece of the property, a much higher interest rate because of a higher level of risk. But if you all of a sudden, as the owner of the property, say, all right, I'm going to fix that, I'm only going to have Class A tenants all the way across, and that is going to maximize the overall value of the property, but it's also going to allow me to maybe get the most favorable terms from the lender because I have only Class A tenants. Does that make sense? Yes? Versus the opposite.
How do you classify them?
I mean, very simply, we could just say by credit score. Or some other metric that would, identify the quality of those tenants. Because, once again, here's the thing that you have to sort of understand. Real estate lending, for the most part, originated and started with a lot of rules of thumb, very fundamental and very basic, okay? Not complex, not really people thinking in depth about a lot of the underlying assumptions. And we didn't always have access to full and complete information the way that we do now. Now, you have easy access to what the credit scores might be for each of these tenants, or their financial viability in almost a real-time basis, okay? The fact that we all get probably notifications from your banks, your credit cards, that at any given time you can press one button, okay, my credit score is now 850 or whatever it is, okay? And that kind of information, should that not translate into, in essence, what a lender might be willing to offer a potential borrower in terms of the deal structure on the loan? In other words, if you're the lender, 2 identical properties, physically, nothing different between them, but yet you've got one property or one set of tenants that's all Class A versus another one's all Class D. Historically, my point is, the lender would not even really pay attention to that because they'd be saying, okay, you have leases? Yeah. What are the lease rates? Got it. No big deal. But not really delving deeper into what is the quality of those. And so what has happened, especially in the CMBS world, is, in many cases, the lender will say, I want lease approval. Meaning that the lender will say, before you basically can actually sign any tenant into your property, if they're not already pre-existing, I want to review the financial documents of that tenant before I allow them to basically occupy your property. Does that make sense? And you say, well, that seems awfully complicated. In one sense, that's really what, on the residential side, especially in condo markets, they already do. I mean, in the sense that, like, if you want to get into a condo association, what do you have to provide? Yeah, basically credit score and all sorts of potentially background documentation. So, you know, and that's just to get into an association. That's not even talking about the loan, okay? So, the reason I'm bringing this up is I think it's an important thing for you to kind of think about in the back of your mind, that if you start thinking about different property types, if you can, especially for office and retail and industrial, that, you know, there's a very good chance that if you can line up much higher quality tenants on the front end, you get a better chance of potentially getting a much better loan than you might be able to get in terms of having the lower quality tenants. I mean, you know, in a perfect world, yeah, we'd all love to have Class A tenants, but it doesn't always happen that way. Okay? All right, getting back to the land thing, we'll move on. Okay, so once again, what you're really going to be searching for in terms of the sales comparison approach is really looking at what is, you know, the selling price per square foot, possibly for the land, and then, you know, to make it more complicated, which I'm not, to make it more complicated, you would make adjustments for differences in, you know, location, which, you know, differences could be, you know, traffic counts, could be demographics, could be, you know, the surrounding area and kind of other sort of psychometrics or whatever that you might want to consider, you know, for what kind of project it is. But at the bare base minimum for the sales comparison approach as it relates to commercial land, we're pretty much just going to be looking at a price per square foot. Okay? Make sense? Okay, moving forward. All right, sort of the final approach to value is the cost approach. Okay? The cost approach, in this case, is where you will pretty much take in the land price, and then to that, you're going to add the construction price, or construction cost, and then that's going to give you your overall value. All right? Now, to get your land price, you're probably going to use the sales comparison approach, and we get a land price of, let's say, I don't know, we'll just sort of throw down a number, $1 million. All right? And your construction cost, let's say, is $9 million. Total would be $10 million. All right? That's super easy to calculate if we're talking about valuing a brand new property. Because valuing a brand new property, you just bought the land, or you just acquired the land, you know how much it's worth. You know how much you just spent or are about to spend on building whatever it is that you're going to build, so it's very easy to come up with a value for the property. But the problem is, what if you're trying to value a property that is old, okay? That maybe is 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old. How do you go about adjusting this value? Well, you're probably not going to be adjusting the land value, but you probably are going to need to make some sort of an adjustment to the construction cost, typically downward, okay? Because the building, like, you know, this building, I think it was built 2007-ish, somewhere around in there, so, you know, talking 12, 13 years old, all right? Well, what has deteriorated over that time, okay? You know, are there certain features that need to be upgraded or, you know, changed or modified that make it different than a brand new building, okay? And, you know, to what extent do we need to adjust then if we were to try to say, okay, yeah, this would be the construction cost to rebuild it as is right now, with materials that are the same as what were used originally, or we basically, we need to subtract out things like functional obsolescence. Okay, what would be an example of functional obsolescence?
Plumbing.
No, that's more physical. That's a good example. Physical obsolescence. I'm just going to not bother writing that out. And then we've also got economic.
Maybe it's like the structure is weak, that there was like a structure fire and it's just not fit for use.
That would be physical.
Wow.
Okay? Physical is the easy one. Physical is just a physical deterioration, you know, in terms of, you know, the degrading of, you know, things that are just have to be replaced or repaired. Okay? Functional obsolescence is something that's not needed anymore, or something that is needed now that doesn't exist. Like, for example, all right, they finally took out at some point, I think actually a week or so ago, I think it was on the second floor, there was this one little bay area of telephone booths. Okay? And you want to talk about, have you ever been on the second floor? Well, anyway, there was this whole little area that they had set aside that were basically set up for like telephones, okay, pay telephones and whatnot, and they took them all out. Well, why did they take them out? They're functionally obsolete. You know, in other words, there's no need for that anymore because now everybody has a cell phone. Why do we need a payphone? It's functionally obsolete. You take a look at housing, and something that might be, you know, functionally obsolete would be, why do you need a fireplace if you have central, you know, air and heat? You know, why do you need, you know, maybe, I'm sorry? A family room, you know, if basically, you know, no one ever gets together as a family, or all doing their own thing. I mean, seriously.
That's deep.
You know, I mean, it's true. But I mean, you think about just how people live. I mean, just in terms of you know, a single-family residence. I mean, something that was ridiculously popular for, you know, I know while I was growing up, it was always such a big deal that you had this formal dining room. The most worthless room in the whole, you know, house because it got used like 2 or 3 times a year for special, you know, whatever, you know, kind of things. But that was it. You know, the rest of the times of the year it was never used. Okay, everyone always ate in the kitchen or somewhere else, you know, in front of the TV or whatever it might be. But my point is that, you know, there are a lot of things. And the examples that we think about for the most part are all like on the residential side of, like, you know, in terms of housing. But, you know, the same sort of thing, you know, is true, you know, with the commercial real estate, that there are certain types of facilities that just simply the way that they're designed, they're no longer valuable. Like, for example, on industrial space. One of the things that we are able to do now that we weren't historically, or we didn't, was we can service warehouses with ceiling heights that are ridiculously high. You know, because we have the technology, we have the machinery, we have all of that to be able to, you know, literally raise and lower items within that warehouse and access those items at really, really, you know, high ceiling heights. Whereas historically, you know, those ceiling heights in warehouses were maybe half of that size or less because the machinery simply didn't exist or wasn't being used to basically take advantage. Well, you think about that, how much more valuable is it to now have a space that has twice the ceiling height, therefore you can cram twice the amount of stuff that needs to be stored in that warehouse than you would have been able to previously. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the old ceiling height has really become functionally obsolete, okay? Or the dock heights, you know, at many of the warehouse properties, you know, in terms of trucking, that specifically the height of the, well, like I said, where the truck can back up to it's changed over time, And as a result of that, that has changed, those properties to make the older ones functionally obsolete. So I guess my point being is, many of the old school warehouses can't even be used. They are functionally obsolete because you can't back up the current trucks to them, you can't access them in terms of you don't have the same ceiling height, you maybe don't have, maybe they're not air conditioned, okay? And another thing that then can't be air conditioned because of maybe the way they're designed and laid out. So the point being is, you're gonna need to adjust if you have a property that has those elements that are functionally obsolete. What is the value of that you would have to spend money to correct it, or is it correctable? Like if you have an old warehouse that has half the ceiling height as another one, then in essence you're sort of saying that compared to the new one, you're going to have to subtract off a considerable amount of the value for that old one because it doesn't measure up to the new standards. Does that make sense? Okay, so you're going to make whatever adjustments you're going to make. Let's just say that for the functional obsolescence, you figure out to fix the problem, you're going to need to subtract off, let's say $50,000. For the physical obsolescence, in terms of, this is just purely the age deteriorating, in terms of, you're going to have to replace air conditioning systems, you're going to replace carpet, you're going to do all these other things. And so let's say that's maybe another $50,000. And then the last one, which is a bit trickier, is the economic obsolescence. And here, this is more of a locational thing. How has the surrounding environment changed? Has it become more popular, less popular, more economically viable, less economically viable, and making that sort of an adjustment in terms of, yeah, this property when it was originally built was drop dead center in the most active retail zone within the city. Now, 30 years later, it's not, okay? And so it simply is not performing at the same level it once did, therefore it has become somewhat economically obsolete. But the reverse could happen as well. You could have a revitalization of an area and then ultimately impact it back. Now, you're sort of saying, okay, well that seems, and I'm kind of rushing through this and making it somewhat subjective, but what we're basically saying is that those three primary areas, functional, physical, and economic obsolescence and deterioration, that for this property, whatever property it is we're valuing, we're going to slice off $150,000 off of that value, okay, and say, okay, now instead of being worth $9 million, it's going to be worth what? 750,000, right? Or seven, I'm sorry, seven.
But realistically, it's gonna be the income, most likely. If it's a commercial property, right?
Oops. Yes. Is that right?
Construction was 900,000.
9 million minus 150,000. Yep, 8,850,000 would be the value of the construction. Then we add to that the land. So the adjusted value for the property would be the 9,850,000. Would be the total adjusted value. Okay, does that make sense? Yep.
Who determines the obsolescence?
An independent appraiser. A simple answer. And this, once again, there's a certain art and there's a certain science to it. The art is, to a certain extent, identifying all of the different possible things that could be included within each of those sort of areas. And then the science is then attributing what is the appropriate dollar amount of that adjustment. So you get 2 different or 3 different appraisers looking the exact same property, and they could probably make significantly different adjustments to that, but you would hope that for the most part they're going to coalesce around some similar issues, and that chances are when you go and you try to reconcile what they've done, that you can kind of say, okay, they made an adjustment for this, do I agree with that, do I not agree with that, and ultimately, how that's going to then factor into, what sort of valuation that the property's going to receive using that approach. Now, here's, let me get to your question real quick. So one of the things to sort of point out, if you think about these, 3 different approaches, that you've got your income approach, you've got your sales comparison, and you've got your sort of cost approach. And if you had to sort of categorize these in terms of past, present, future, okay, in terms of which one is sort of looking toward the future, which one is sort of looking toward the past, which one is sort of looking at what everything is right here and now, okay? How do you go about classifying these?
Income is now.
No.
Income is future.
Income is future. It's all based on the future prediction of the income, what you anticipate income to be.
So sales is past.
Sales comps is past. This is based on past sales.
So, this is logging up the brain.
And so that would mean cost is
Today.
present. That's based on present sort of construction cost, right here, right now. All right, so that's one thing you need to kind of, put in your mind. Another thing, for each of these approaches, certain property types tend to lend themselves to one of these types of valuations, although we're going to apply all 3. What kind of properties, as a general rule, are going to lend themselves to using more heavily the income approach?
Commercial.
Okay, commercial. Okay. What about the sales comparison approach?
Residential.
Residential. What about the cost approach?
Commercial.
No.
Residential.
Industrial.
No.
Hospitality?
No.
Development.
What?
Development.
Not necessarily.
All of them.
No. No. Well, none of the traditional uses. I would argue that cost approach is most directly relevant to special use properties. And by special use properties, I would mean churches, religious sort of, institutions, city halls, schools, public uses, civic uses. Things that are, once again, sort of unusual, special purpose, because the point being is, how are you going to find a sales comp for, a school? Or a sales comp for, a city hall? You're not.
About healthcare, you really don't know. Or out.
Healthcare is weird, but healthcare I would probably put in the cost approach, but it also is going to be income driven. It's going to be, in terms of what is the income that's going to generate in the future. But, the cost approach really is going to focus a lot on sort of specialty properties, okay? All right.
What about like golf courses? And
Same thing.
Same thing.
Well, I would say it would factor into cost, but also you would probably look at, well, what is the income potential that it has?
You would look at sales comps though too for that.
Sort of if they're available, but the problem is how often do golf courses sell? That's the problem. That okay, well this one sold, let's say 5 years ago. Is that really relevant?
That's true.
And you really have to look at, for the most part, okay, does it have any income producing potential? And this is also kind of an interesting thing. Actually, you bring up a good point on once again another little segue here. But for many, many years, especially in the 1970s and the 1980s and the early 90s, so many golf course communities were developed. And now you have a ever declining number of people playing golf. And so
They're super annoying to deal with too.
no, absolutely. But my point is, what does that mean? And that land, in some cases, purposely was floodplain or basically susceptible to flooding or, may not be prime land for, development without serious modification to it. And you may be seriously restricted, by some sort of property owners association as to being able to ever convert it from, that current use to something else. Even if no one ever is out there playing golf, because the property owners association is saying, no, we don't want to sell it because we like looking out onto the golf course that, is perfectly maintained. But I mean, that's I think a serious issue that is beginning to really take hold, because I think it's pretty clear there are way too many of these communities that were built and the usage is just simply not there.
Have you heard of people only trying to buy churches for rental properties?
Not only trying to do it, but yes, it happens.
Yeah, I've come across some investors that are interested in it. I just don't know why.
They pay the rent.
I guess. I mean, well, what's the appeal? I guess.
But usually usually the amount they want to pay in many cases is a lot lower than you would be able to get for many alternative uses. But you look at it, well, they're only using it a couple of days a week maybe. So there's some trade-offs.
Rent the parking lot.
Okay, moving forward. Almost there.
I have a question about how does obsolescence lower the construction costs?
Well, obsolescence means it's an adjustment that we need to make to the property, maybe that it is more obsolete, or maybe it's better than the overall, probably we make a positive adjustment. So it's just a question of what it is that we're searching for. And in this case, if we're just simply saying, this property, we're making the adjustment downward simply relative to other properties because we know we're going to have to fix a problem, therefore, that's the reason we're lowering. In other words, if we say, coming back to this, okay.
What do you call the water up?
Well, okay. So, let's just say, let's take the physical. That's the easiest one to deal with. All right. So let's say that something, we know we're going to have to replace carpet. And that's going to cost us, let's say, $50,000. All right? So what we're doing is we're adjusting the value of the property down by $50,000 to knowing that we're going to have to spend $50,000 to basically get it up to whatever the current new sort of cost is, or the new condition would be. All right.
President,
Yep.
before you move on, I remember you saying that, well, I said hospitality when you were asking if they would use the cost approach. Would you say they would use cost approach and income approach?
It's going to be heavily dominant on cost and income. Cost because they're sort of unique in that every hospitality property, if they have really unique features, you're going to have to use the cost approach. And what I mean by that is, like, a resort property is not the same in terms of the valuation as just a normal side of the road Holiday Inn. Does that make sense? Because with a resort property, what else do you have? You probably have tennis courts, maybe a golf course, spas, high-end, outdoor restaurants and tiki bars and God only knows what else, hiking trails. It could be a gazillion other features with the resort property that sometimes make the conversion to income a little bit more of a challenge. I mean, ultimately, it's still going to be driven by income, but all of those unique features you need to be able to kind of encapsulate the uniqueness of those and finding, the value for those sometimes is a little bit more challenging than just a normal sticks and bricks kind of basic hotel that only sells rooms and nothing else. Does that make sense? Because with the basic hotel that sells rooms and nothing else, it's pretty simple. It's just an income approach. But the cost approach, you would have to figure out how much extra you're having to pay for all of these other ancillary items and really factor that in. Because what may be happening is you're not fully reflecting the value of those in the income numbers because they're not being put to the most productive use that they can be put to. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Moving forward. Almost there. Okay. Two more little topics and then we're ready for a little quiz. All right, let's see.
His favorite word.
So,
You ever see Good in the Green Interesting Shit?
all right, so one of the things that we had briefly talked about is this kind of a whole idea of a sale leaseback. And this is where you, as a developer, have developed a property, and I think the example I typically use is something like a CVS or like a Walgreens, all right? You come in, you buy the land, all right? So you buy the land, you build the building, you put in the parking lot, all that sort of stuff, you know, for your CVS, Walgreens, whatever it is, all right? And you do that on the corporate level, all right? You do all the development, you acquire the land, you build the building, you open it up, ready to go. But then you say, after you've done all that, and you have spent, let's say, I don't know, let's say $5 million. All right? So you spent $5 million acquiring the land, building the building, ready for occupancy. Okay, everybody with me?
No.
But after you've done that, you decide you don't really want to own it. You would prefer to sell it to someone and then lease it back long term. And the reason you want to do that is you want to take all that debt or all of that cash that you spent and basically free it up. Does that make sense? In other words, you just spent $5 million. You would like to get that $5 million back, but the icing on the cake is you hope and you expect that you can sell it for more than that $5 million. That you've created enough value in this that someone will buy it from you for more than that. Well, let's just say they'll buy it from you at $6 million. All right? And you're saying, well, why would they pay me $1 million more than what I have in it? They're buying it for basically cash flow. Okay? And so what that does, though, if you think about it, gives you $1 million free and clear. That in one sense, one way to look at this is you could use that $1 million to do what? Pay rent for several months or potentially several years, depending on what the terms of the lease are. Does that make sense? All right, so let's just say that we engage in a typical, let's say 20 or 25 year lease. We'll go with 25 years. So 25-year lease. All right. Now, if we think about the person that's buying this, they want some sort of usually just a percentage rate of return. Okay. For them, you know, that's all that really matters because it's mailbox money from their perspective. All right. And so let's just say they want a 5% rate of return on their investment. All right, so the way we could approach this, if we could do this on a monthly basis, so let's just say 12 months per year. So everything out. We start off with 25 years, or rain is slow, so it's like was it 300 months? 25 times 12, yeah, 300 months. All right, and in this case, $6 million, if you will, is the amount of money that they have spent. We're looking at this kind of from the perspective of the borrower here for the moment. $6 million is what they have spent, and they want a 5% rate of return. So what does that mean the lease payment would have to be?
So you're saying that you bought it for $5 million, and then that you're selling it to them for $6 and they're leasing it back?
We're selling them to the $6. So I'm looking at this from the perspective of the purchaser. They paid $6 million, yes? They want a 5% rate of return, whatever they have invested, and they're willing to take a 25-year lease, okay? So in this case, basically $35,000 a month would be the lease payment, okay? Now that basically makes the assumption, I'm not saying it's a good assumption or it's a bad assumption, I'm saying it makes the assumption that in essence, after 25 years, you sort of look at it that really they've just been paid back, okay? And they could probably release it at the end of 25 years, okay? But you're almost sort of making the assumption that all the value in this property is really being recaptured over that 25-year period. Does that make sense? Okay? I'm not saying it's realistic, I'm just saying that's kind of sometimes the way these work.
So they actually purchase it, or they're?
Okay, let me make sure that I'm very clear about this.
Okay.
All right. There are two parties to this deal. Okay. The first party is CVS. CVS buys the land. They build the building. They occupy the building. Okay. Once they are open for occupancy, they find an investor. Let's say they find Cole. Cole says, I am ready to buy this location. All right. And so Cole gives them $6 million. Okay. Gives CVS the $6 million. CVS obviously profits by $1 million because it only cost them $5 million to build. But Cole is just saying, I don't really care what you built it for, how much, that's irrelevant to me. What matters to me is I just plop down $6 million. I want a 5% rate of return on that money for the next 25 years. All right? So Cole basically says 25 years, $6 million outflow, 5% rate of return. That means CVS is going to have to pay me $35,000 a month for the next 25 years. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, at the end of that 25 years, typically what would happen is maybe CVS has a sort of right to renew the lease at some sort of either predetermined price or based upon some sort of a market index or metric, whatever. We're not even considering that in this analysis. We're just simply saying right here, right now, for the next 25 years, this is what we're considering. Okay, so one question or one issue that we sort of said, okay, from the perspective of CVS, they've got $1 million in cash sitting around that in essence, they can fund that $35,075 $40 lease payment for how many months?
28 and a half.
Okay.
I think.
Yep. So 28.51 months, or a little over 2 years and 4 months. Okay? So for the first 2 years and 4 months, this CVS can be up and operating just, under normal circumstances, and they're not having to pay any lease payments. So hopefully they're able to generate a lot of excess revenue that they can then set aside, for future lease payments. But it also allows them to sort of, if you think about it, to take away a lot of the risk of opening up a new location, because in essence, they're not having to worry about the rent piece for the first couple of years. It's genius, okay, from the standpoint of an operational side of things. I mean, think of it like, remove the fact that it's CVS, put almost any business there, and you sort of say, if you can do that, and then your business, whatever it is, like a restaurant, you can say, okay, for the first 2 years, I don't have to worry about paying rent while I build up a clientele. Wonderful. And then I start paying rent after that. Great. Okay? Make sense?
But you have to, is it net positive though? Because you have to pay taxes on the million and then what I mean?
Yes, but it all depends on how long they held it, which we're going to get into in the investments class, in terms of whatever sort of capital gain that they would have on that, and then how if it's getting plowed back into the business, then it may be a legitimate business expense, which a lease payment would be.
And you're betting that you're making more than $1 million in that 2 years.
Right. Okay?
So CVS is developing and building their new store. Kohl's putting out $1 million more,
No, well, yes, he's putting up $1 million more, $6
$1
million.
million more, so that he gets the
The lease payments
the lease payments
for 25
for
years.
his mailbox.
Yep. Cole has to do nothing during that 25-year period.
He doesn't own the CVS.
Well, he does, but he doesn't have to do anything. He technically owns it,
He owns it without having to.
but he has no responsibilities.
It's triple
You're buying
net.
consent, I'm buying
It's an
consent.
absolute triple net lease. So if somebody throws a brick through the front glass, Cole's not responsible, CVS is. Somebody gets and rams a car into the building, Cole's not responsible, CVS is. If the parking lot needs to be resurfaced, CVS is responsible, not Cole. If the building gets destroyed by fire, CVS is responsible, not Cole.
So what if it was a gross lease?
That's a whole different thing, because under a gross lease, then that would be an all bills paid situation, so Cole will be collecting a lot more in rental income, but Cole's gonna be responsible for a lot more. Cole's gonna be responsible for making the property tax payments, making the insurance payments, keeping the building maintained, all of that sort of stuff.
And it's beneficial for them because now they can write off all the payments for the monthly.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was it about the 28 months that,
Well, okay,
did you do?
if CVS has generated a profit of $1 million and their lease payment is $35,000, that means that's how many months they could basically go without having to really come out of pocket for their lease payment. So really over two years and 4 months, they can avoid basically having to come out of pocket any additional funds for their lease payments, okay?
How does Cole own the CVS? Somebody just owns the building or the
No, well, he owns the building and he owns the real estate. He doesn't own the contents of the CVS in the sense of like all the merchandise on the shelves and that sort of thing. He may or may not own the store fixtures, like in terms of like shelving and things like that. But in terms of like the merchandise, no, he does not own that. But the thing about it is, the way in which these agreements are written, Cole could not go on the property and let's say, I don't know, erect a storage building on the parking lot. He doesn't have the right to do that, even though he owns it. He doesn't have the right to do that because it's really, CVS is the one really in control. Any more than you rent a property from somebody, like let's say you rent a house, unless, depending on the circumstances, but normally you rent a house from somebody, they're not going to be able to come on your property and come into your house and look around and start building a bunch of random stuff on your property, that sort of thing. While you lease it, you're the occupant of the property and you're pretty much responsible for a lot of things. But the difference is with this type of lease, the tenant is responsible for everything. Whereas like with a normal house lease or apartment lease, if somebody breaks a window, more than likely the landlord is responsible. Okay? If the plumbing stops working, normally the landlord is responsible. But under this type of lease, they're not. The tenant is responsible for everything.
This might sound like a silly question, but can Cole just walk up into CVS anytime since he has like the keys to the building? Like, can he just,
Chances are he doesn't have the keys to the building.
it's not.
More than likely, it's pretty much off limits for him to be able to really even come on site.
Unless he's just trying to get like
Free drugs.
something from CVS. Yeah. Right? Like he just doesn't go to CVS.
Okay, moving forward.
Walk in, put my feet up. Everything the light touches is mine.
Okay, last topic of the day. Partitioning the internal rate of return. Okay. The two ways in which we make money off of real estate we've talked about are, number one, the operating income that it generates, each year, and then the other way is off of the sale price or reversion, okay, whenever we go to sell it at some point. Now, if we're given like a cash flow of a property, can you give me a dollar amount we paid for the property?
1 million per property.
1 million. All right, so we paid $1 million for the property here at time period 0. All right, and then let's say for the next 4 years, we receive operating income. All right, this would mean basically like net operating income or before tax cash flow off of the property of how much? It's kind of low, but no, we'll go with it. What the heck? All right, going sort of no further than that, what would we say just off of the operating income we're really getting is kind of an annual percentage rate of return? No. Okay, what's 50,000 divided by 1 million? Okay, 50,000 divided by 1 million.
0.5%.
5%. So in essence, we're getting a 5% rate of return, okay, just off of the operating income. Yes? We'll be simply looking at that. Yes? Okay. Now, at the end of this 4 years, though, we're going to sell the property. How much are we going to sell it for? Now, if we just sold it for 1 million and we calculated the internal rate of return without even having to punch it in the calculator, I can tell you your internal rate of return is going to be 5%. Okay? Does that make sense? Because you're basically getting back exactly what you put into it, and you're getting 5% a year for the time period you own it. Yes?
It's technically less than that because of inflation, right?
Well, no, you're getting your 5% per year, but it's just that you're not getting any return off of the reversion. Okay? Now, let's say, though, actually, let's do it this way. I don't want to complicate this. Let's just say that instead of getting the $1 million only, let's say we get something more than that. So we get 1 million, I don't know, 250,000. All right. So we've had, in essence, a 25% increase overall in the value of the property. Now, granted, we're not going to get that until 4 years from now, but yet that is the value increase that we've associated with it. All right. So let's just say that we take this and we calculate the internal rate of return. Number one, we automatically know we're going to get something greater than a 5% rate of return just simply because of the reversion value. Okay, is everybody with me on that? Yes? Okay. All right. So let's put this in the calculator. So all you're going to be doing, you could put it, once again, as a cash flow or just simply as the 1 million. Right. Just change variables. Okay, 1 million as present value, 50,000 as payment, 1,250,000.
Is this one full payments?
One payment.
1 payment per year. Okay, and solve for the internal rate of return or the interest rate. And this is for, I'm sorry, for 4 years. Okay, let's start with this. $10.36%. Everybody match up? Yes? Okay. Now, this is where, okay, nothing is new up to this point. You've done this 1,000 times. Okay, so what we want to do.
How come you're not adding the 50? Oh, because we're not doing cash flows. We're
Right.
just doing the total.
Yes. Okay, so, as I said, nothing is new here. Done this many times. All right, so now what we want to do is something that's called partitioning the IRR. In other words, partitioning means separate. We want to separate, in essence, kind of what proportion of this return is coming from the operating cash flows and what proportion is coming from, in essence, the reversion. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's how you can do it. First thing you're going to do, you're going to leave all that in, okay? And then we're going to put in 0 as future value, and we're going to solve for present value. Not change anything else. And what you end up with is 157, 271, 27. Okay, so in essence, what we've done is we've said, okay, we're going to set the future value, so we're only finding, in essence, the value of what? The operating cash flows. Okay? Now, if we go back in and we put the 1,250,000 in as our future value, and we put now then 0 as payment, and then solve for present value. We get 842,728.73. Okay? That is, in essence, the present value of the reversion. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, before we do anything else, I just want you to add these two numbers together.
Is it okay if we put that in like a negative? Like
Yeah,
if it's
that's
one-
fine. Okay. So all we're saying is that's the present value of each of those. Okay, add those two together. You should get the full 1 million.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're basically saying, and I purposely, because we picked $1 million, this makes it really easy for the math. What percentage of the return is coming from one versus the other? Okay, we said that this one, the 157, 271, is coming off of the operating cash flow. So, in other words,
By adding these.
so this is off of the operating. This is off of the sale or reversion. So, in essence, for this petitioning of the IRR, we're saying that basically 15% is coming from the operating income, 84% is coming from the reversion. Does that make sense? Okay, now, the question that I hope you're asking is, why do we care? Okay, all right? We care because this is fundamental in the sense of, you know, the whole thing of, you know, do we get our money now or do we get it later? And how much are we hoping that we get our money now versus getting it later, versus how much certainty do we have of getting it now versus later? In other words, think about how this whole thing could be structured very differently. We could have the same dollar amount allocated, but allocated differently. Like, for example, we could what would potentially allow us to increase these numbers?
Bumps.
What?
Bumps, like rental increases.
Okay, maybe I'm being too oblique with my kind of question. Okay. What would allow us to increase this is not spending as much on the property in terms of repair and maintenance. Meaning we have to keep more of the money.
Lower operating costs.
But what's that, lowering their operating cost? But then what might that do to the long-term value of the property? In other words, it might lower this number. You follow me? But like, for example, if we defer maintenance and we start milking the property for every dollar we can milk out of it for the 4 years that we own it, chances are this amount is going to become less because there's going to be a lot of deferred maintenance. Yes? Okay. Now, we kind of go back and we redo the numbers. In doing that, what you're going to see is that a heavier shift, percentage-wise, to the operating income and less, obviously, impact the reversion would have. Does that make sense, conceptually? Yes or no? So in other words, what in one sense it's almost sort of telling you is it's good to be a slumlord. You know, because you basically are getting the money now, you're getting every dollar you can get out of the property now, and the hope would be that it's not going to have that big of an impact when you go to sell it. But that's a risk that you're taking, you know, by trying to extract as much as you possibly can now by not putting any more than you have to into it. Does that make sense? Now, mathematically, what we can, you know, kind of begin to do is just, to try to get a sense of, for this investment, are we relying too heavily on the reversion to really give us the value in the property? Or are we relying too heavily on the operating income to give us the value in the property? Where is the value coming from based upon the analysis that we're doing? And in this analysis, basically what we're saying is the value of this property, or the value of this return, this internal rate of return of 10.36, is predominantly coming from the reversion. And that could be a very risky thing depending on what is really happening, to drive that. In other words, how certain are we that we are really going to be able to sell this property for this, 4 years into the future? And do we have to maybe say, maybe having 84% of our internal rate of return being driven by the reversion, that may be too high of a percentage. So here's where I guess you're trying to say, okay, well, where are you going with this? All right. In a perfect world, you probably want a bit more of a balance between the two, okay? I'm not saying it needs to be 50-50, but there probably should be a little bit more of a balance, maybe between 40% and 60%, or 30 and 70 probably. But it'd be, because I think if it gets too far out of balance, then it's a situation of where you're relying too heavily on one versus the other for what's driving the underlying value of the asset. Although I think most people would agree that if you could inflate the heck out of these numbers, then screw what that reversion value is, because you're getting all your money out up front. Okay? And I'm not saying that's good, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying that's, you have to sort of think about, well, whether that actually is a possibility.
Yeah, but that 50,000 for the year is super low.
Right.
It's like,
But see, but this is where it gets into the philosophy of ownership. I'm the kind of owner, for the most part, I put into the property what I need to put into the property to make sure the property is functional, and it's reasonably well maintained. But I'm not the kind of owner that's going to go in every single year, whether it needs it or not, and put on a fresh coat of paint, and automatically, do all these little nitpicky sort of, repairs and maintenance on the property. I know people who are like that, where that, it's like literally, there's a scratch on the wall and they're out there with a paintbrush, fixing it, that day. And then every, thing that can possibly be done to maintain and upgrade and whatever the property they're constantly doing. Now, chances are their tenants are going to be super happy. But how much are they going to basically suffer financially?
Willing to pay for it.
By having to do all those sorts of things now, the other end of the extreme is not me. The other end of the extreme is the person who ignores every single problem that the property has. That, okay, there's a leaky roof, they don't fix it, the problem gets worse, it destroys the property, kind of thing. or, you know, that you've got, you know, basically they're just not paying any attention, they're an absentee landlord, period, okay? And that's the opposite end of the sort of the extreme. And my point is, based on that philosophy of ownership and maintenance of the property, will dictate to a certain extent how high these numbers are and potentially translate into how high that reversion is. Okay. But what I'm saying to you is sometimes, purely on a financial basis, it does make sense to be a slumlord and not spend any more money than you positively have to try to maximize your short-term revenue and sort of forget about that long-term issue. Okay.
So this is a way of using two of the approaches to figure out the value of your...
Well, in this case, it's still all driven by income, but at the same time, you are considering, you know, what dollar amounts that you are putting into the property in terms of repairs and maintenance and upkeep. But it's all driven ultimately by income. Okay, all right?
But you're not comparing the sale.
Well, the sale, this 1.25 million, is all I'm saying is, okay, if we spend more money and we earn more money here, chances are the property is deteriorating in value. Therefore, at the end of the 4 years, this number is going to be less because we've let the property end up in disrepair, therefore it's not going to sell for as much. Okay, all right, we good?
We're great.
Okay, time for the quizzing.
No quizzing.
You want to take a break or you want to take a quiz?
Take the quizzing.
Okay, quizzing. What? Yeah, that's all, but, you'll see.
Is it 5,000, 5 million, is it 20% of that, across that, times 4, is it 4 times 8, to get this number?
No.